500 rainbow trout floating belly up in my crystal-clear lake. The rotting stench hit like a gut punch as I stared at my ruined livelihood. I'm Ezra Blackwood, disabled Army vet who spent 5 years building this sustainable trout farm on my grandfather's Montana property. At 7 a.m., Delilah Thornfield, my HOA president, strutted onto my dock with her morning coffee, smirking at the carnage. "Finally," she sneered.
"Maybe now you'll shut down this disgusting fish operation."
She dumped 40 pounds of copper sulfate at 2 a.m. Environmental terrorism against a disabled veteran, all because she hated seeing people fish from her precious view.
"You have no idea what you've just done,"
I told her. She laughed. "I solved a neighborhood problem." What this suburban psychopath didn't know would destroy her in ways she never imagined. Some lessons come with a very bitter taste. What would you do if your HOA Karen destroyed your dreams? Drop A and tell me where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how this suburban psychopath declared war on a disabled veteran and accidentally set up her own destruction. I'm Ezra Blackwood, former Army engineer turned fish farmer. 5 years ago, an IED in Afghanistan shredded my left leg and ended my 20-year military career. The VA disability check barely covered rent, let alone medical bills that followed me home like vultures. That's when I inherited Grandpa's 200-acre Montana ranch, including a 40-acre lake so pristine you could see trout swimming 20 feet down. Clearwater Lake sat 300 feet higher than the valley floor, fed by mountain springs that had been flowing since the Ice Age. The morning mist rising off the water smelled like liquid silver mixed with pine needles. Most folks would have just fished for fun. But I saw survival. 2 years researching aquaculture, another year drowning in permits, 2 more building floating pens. By year 5, I had $180,000 worth of breeding stock and was finally making money. The sound of trout jumping at dawn became better than any alarm clock. Then the California invasion began. Willowbrook Estates, 47 McMansions sprouting like expensive tumors on the Tatum family's old cattle ranch. Each house cost $800,000 to $1.2 million. The kind of money that bulldozed 200 acres of actual nature, then wrote rules about preserving rural charm. Here's what none of these transplants knew. Their fancy subdivisions sat directly downstream from my property. Those same mountain springs that fed my lake continued underground through limestone caves, eventually surfacing as the aquifer that supplied Willowbrook's private well system. Every drop of their drinking water originated from Clearwater Lake. The Geological Survey sat buried in county records, never shared with residents. They had no clue their morning coffee came from the same springs that kept my trout happy. Enter Delilah Thornfield, their self-appointed dictator and my future nemesis. Picture a 58-year-old corporate compliance officer who'd spent 30 years in San Francisco finding genuine pleasure in catching violations. When she moved to Montana, she brought that same energy to suburban warfare. Her voice could cut glass and often did during HOA meetings, where the sound of neighbors grinding their teeth became background music. Here's the kicker. Delilah had been rejected 3 times from the exclusive Bitterroot Angling Club. Too aggressive, they said. Didn't understand fishing etiquette. So when my operation started attracting happy customers, it triggered something primal in her control freak brain. The community split fast. Old-timer ranchers like Tom and Sarah Tatum supported me. They understood working the land for survival. But the new money crowd saw my fishing operation as a threat to their manufactured paradise. The trouble escalated when Billy Redstone, a local fishing guide, started bringing clients to my lake. Nothing crazy, maybe 15 people on busy days, but enough to send Delilah into overdrive. Her first attack came on a Tuesday morning that started peaceful enough. I was feeding my trout, watching them rise like silver coins in the sunlight when gravel crunched under expensive heels. "Mr. Blackwood, your fishing circus ends today." Delilah stood at my property line in a power suit that cost more than my monthly disability check, clutching a manila folder like a weapon. The diesel exhaust from her idling BMW mixed with the clean lake air like pollution invading paradise. "Morning," I said, not stopping my routine. "Don't be cute." She opened her folder with surgical precision. "Your commercial operation violates our covenant 4.7b. All fishing activities must cease immediately, and you'll install an 8-foot privacy fence along the entire shoreline. Cost estimate, $47,000. The morning mist suddenly felt arctic. "Ma'am, this is my property. Your covenants don't apply here." Her smile could have frozen the lake solid. "Watch me prove you wrong, soldier boy. You have 30 days to comply or we'll file injunctions, zoning complaints, and nuisance lawsuits until you're buried in legal fees." She handed me a formal violation notice, the paper crackling in the mountain breeze like dried leaves. "Some of us understand property values, Mr. Blackwood. Your little hobby is costing us real money." What this suburban terrorist didn't realize was that her quest to eliminate fishing would soon contaminate the very water flowing from her kitchen tap. Sometimes karma works through geology. Delilah wasn't bluffing about the legal warfare. Within 48 hours, my mailbox looked like a paper shredder had vomited official documents. County zoning complaints, environmental violation reports, business license challenges. She'd filed everything except a complaint about my morning coffee being too loud. The stack of papers rustled in the autumn wind like dead leaves, each one stamped with official seals that meant expensive legal responses. Then came the surprise inspection. County Inspector Jake Morrison showed up Thursday morning while I was checking my aeration systems. I'd learned from other aquaculture operators that hostile inspectors could shut you down for months, even when you're completely legal. One guy in Missoula told me an inspector once cited him for insufficient fish happiness documentation. Apparently that's a real thing. Jake climbed out of his truck looking like he'd rather be auditing a sewage treatment plant. Clipboard in hand, skeptical expression locked and loaded. The smell of wood smoke from my cabin mixed with his diesel exhaust, creating this ominous industrial meets wilderness vibe. "Mr. Blackwood, hear about unauthorized commercial fishing complaints." My stomach dropped until I noticed something that changed everything. A small Marine Corps tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve. "Semper Fi," I said, extending my hand. His entire demeanor shifted like someone had flipped a switch. "No shit, what unit?" "Army engineer, but we're all brothers, right?" Jake's laugh echoed across the water, startling a great blue heron into flight. "Damn right. Now let me guess. Some HOA princess with too much time and too little sense." Turns out Jake had seen this pattern before. Rich civilians moving to Montana, then trying to weaponize bureaucracy against locals who actually work for a living. He'd developed what he called his harassment radar, and Delilah's complaint had lit it up like a Christmas tree. We spent the next hour talking shop while he examined my operation. Every permit was perfect because I'd learned the hard way that disabled veterans can't afford to cut corners. Society's always looking for an excuse to tear us down. Jake tested water quality, checked fish health protocols, even counted my aeration bubbles. Everything was textbook. "This is actually impressive," he said, scribbling notes. "Most operations I inspect are missing something. You're running this like NASA would run a fish farm." The coffee I poured from my thermos steamed in the cool mountain air. Couldn't afford mistakes. Too much riding on this. Well, whoever filed this complaint is about to be very disappointed. Jake's pen scratched across his clipboard with the sound of vindication. "I'm recommending your facility as a model for sustainable practices." Sir, here's something most people don't know. When an inspector files a harassment complaint against the person who initiated the inspection, it creates a paper trail that can protect you in court. Jake explained this while documenting Delilah's obvious targeting of a disabled veteran's legal business. 3 days later, his report hit both our mailboxes simultaneously. It didn't just clear me, it demolished Delilah's credibility. Jake's assessment praised my exceptional environmental stewardship and specifically noted that complaints appeared inconsistent with observed conditions and potentially motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate regulatory concerns. The sound you heard echoing across 3 counties was Delilah's sanity snapping. She escalated immediately, filing complaints with the state environmental agency about groundwater contamination. Pure fiction, but it triggered another round of paperwork warfare. Then came her masterstroke of suburban terrorism. Tuesday morning, I was replacing a feeding timer when the rumble of multiple engines announced trouble. 3 black SUVs rolled up my driveway like a DEA raid, disgorging 6 guys in tactical gear who looked like they'd failed the police academy entrance exam. "Sir, step away from the water," their leader announced through a bullhorn that could have woken fish in Canada. Area under investigation for environmental violations. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth as Delilah emerged from the lead SUV, clipboard clutched like a weapon, and wearing an expression of pure malicious joy. She'd hired private security to intimidate a disabled veteran off his own property. "Gentlemen," she announced with the authority of someone who'd watched too many police procedurals, "document all fishing equipment and evidence of unauthorized commercial activity. Mr. Blackwood needs education about legal compliance." 6 wannabe commandos started photographing my completely legal operation while their boots crunched across my gravel like an occupying army. One guy tried taking water samples until I informed him that would constitute theft of private property. "Ma'am, you're trespassing," I said, keeping my voice steady despite wanting to unleash some colorful army vocabulary. "We're conducting a lawful investigation," she purred with satisfaction. "Time for my countermove." I called Jake Morrison directly, putting him on speaker. "Jake, remember that harassment complaint? I've got 6 private contractors photographing my legal operation while my HOA president plays general." 30 minutes later, Jake arrived with 2 sheriff's deputies. Real law enforcement told fake law enforcement to pack up or face actual trespassing charges. Delilah's expensive intimidation squad retreated faster than French cavalry. Her face transformed from smug to murderous as her tactical theater drove away. "This isn't over," she hissed. "No, ma'am," I replied. "But next time, maybe hire people who understand property law." Delilah's humiliation with the security theater only made her more dangerous. Like a cornered rattlesnake, she got creative and twice as venomous. 2 weeks later, Billy Redstone called with panic in his voice. "Ezra, they're blocking the county road. Posted signs, hired guards, turning away my clients like we're trying to access Fort Knox." I drove down to investigate and found Delilah's masterstroke. Private property, no trespassing signs along the public easement that provided legal access to Clearwater Lake. 2 guards in matching polo shirts operated from a portable booth, rejecting confused families like bouncers at an exclusive nightclub. The diesel generator powering their operation mixed its exhaust with frustrated parents idling cars, creating this toxic cloud of bureaucratic stupidity. Kids pressed against car windows, fishing rods unused, while Derek, the lead guard whose neck was thicker than most people's thighs, consulted his clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Excuse me," I said, approaching his little kingdom. "This is a county easement. You can't block public access." Derek squinted at me with the concentration of someone trying to remember if 2 + 2 = fish. "Ma'am says whole area's private now. HOA business." Here's something most people don't realize. Blocking public easements is a federal crime when it interferes with interstate commerce. Billy's fishing guide business brought clients from 3 states, making Delilah's blockade technically a violation of the Commerce Clause. Not that Derek would understand constitutional law if it bit him on his oversized posterior. But Delilah's real nuclear option arrived 3 days later, taped to my door like a declaration of war. A nuisance lawsuit demanding immediate cessation of all fishing activities, plus $50,000 in damages for diminished property values and community disruption. 23 pages of pure legal fiction claiming my 15-person daily operation somehow equaled running a motorcycle rally in a retirement home. The papers rustled in the mountain wind like whispered threats, each paragraph more divorced from reality than the last. The strategy was classically wealthy: weaponize the court system against someone who can't afford prolonged legal warfare. Even winning costs money when you're fighting frivolous lawsuits. She was betting my disability income would crack under sustained legal pressure. That's when fate delivered an unexpected ally. Emma Vasquez, reporter for the Bitterroot Valley News, had been investigating rural gentrification conflicts. But she wasn't just any journalist. She was a former military spouse whose ex-husband had struggled with similar post-service business challenges. When she heard about armed guards blocking public fishing access, it triggered personal memories of bureaucratic harassment. She arrived Saturday morning with a photographer. Timing that seemed coincidental until I learned she'd been monitoring police scanner traffic and knew exactly when confrontations were likely. The money shot practically staged itself. Derek turning away a disabled veteran trying to take his grandson fishing. The kid couldn't have been 8 years old, clutching a tiny rod and wearing a Future Marine t-shirt that broke your heart. "Sir, access denied," Derek announced with the authority of someone who'd finally found a job that didn't require actual thinking. "But Grandpa promised we'd catch trout," the boy said, his disappointment echoing across the parking area like a knife through every decent person's soul. Emma's photographer captured the perfect image of American injustice. Powerful people blocking children from enjoying public land. But the real drama exploded when Delilah arrived to personally supervise her blockade operation. Emma's first question revealed she'd already researched Delilah's corporate background and knew exactly which buttons to push. Mrs. Thornfield, given your experience with regulatory compliance in San Francisco, surely you understand that blocking public easements violates federal interstate commerce laws? Delilah's confident media smile froze like someone had just explained quantum physics using interpretive dance. She'd expected softball questions about community safety, not constitutional law citations from a reporter who'd done actual homework. We're protecting our community from environmental damage, Delilah stammered, her corporate training abandoning her faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship. Environmental damage, Mr. Blackwood's operation has EPA certification for sustainable practices. Permits can be revoked, Delilah managed, sweat beading despite the cool October air. Emma's follow-up questions dissected Delilah's position with surgical precision, focusing on the targeting of disabled veterans and illegal restriction of public rights. You could literally watch Delilah realize she'd walked into a journalistic ambush disguised as a friendly interview. The article hit Tuesday with devastating effectiveness. HOA illegally blocks disabled vets' business, restricts public access to county land. Emma had crafted a perfect David versus Goliath narrative, complete with my military service, legal documentation of harassment, and photos of confused families being turned away by hired muscle. The story exploded across social media like wildfire in August, shared by veterans organizations from Billings to Bozeman. Within 48 hours, the county attorney's office, already monitoring HOA overreach in wealthy subdivisions, ordered Delilah to remove her illegal blockade or face federal prosecution. Derek's booth disappeared faster than dignity at a reality TV reunion show. Standing in her driveway as her hired authority figures packed up their unconstitutional operation, Delilah looked like someone had just explained that her winning lottery ticket was printed with invisible ink. "This isn't over," she snarled across the road. "Keep digging, ma'am," I replied. "Eventually you'll strike oil, or hell." What happened next proved that public humiliation had officially snapped Delilah's last functioning brain cell. The media coverage had destroyed her carefully crafted image. Social media was merciless. Memes of her blocking kids from fishing, comments comparing her to cartoon villains, veterans groups organizing boycotts of any business associated with Willowbrook Estates. Her LinkedIn profile went from community leader to internet laughingstock overnight. Normal people would have retreated. Delilah escalated. The warning came from an unexpected source. Margaret Wu, the HOA treasurer, called Tuesday evening with worry crackling in her voice like static electricity before a thunderstorm. "Mr. Blackwood, I think you need to know. Delilah just authorized emergency spending for algae treatment chemicals. She claims your lake is contaminating our groundwater." My blood turned to ice water. Every aquaculture operator has heard horror stories about neighbor poisoning disputes. Usually it involves antifreeze and personal grudges, but this felt different. More calculated, more insane. "What kind of chemicals, Margaret?" "Copper sulfate, 40 pounds. She said the county environmental office recommended immediate application to prevent contamination spread." Copper sulfate. The name hit like a slap. Small doses control algae. Large doses commit fish genocide. 40 pounds could sterilize a lake and leave it looking deceptively pristine, the perfect crime for someone who didn't understand aquatic ecosystems. I'd been researching online forums where frustrated property owners discussed pest control solutions for unwanted neighbors. The advice was always the same. Copper sulfate leaves no obvious evidence, kills everything quietly, and can be blamed on natural algae blooms. Delilah had obviously done her homework on environmental terrorism. I spent 3 sleepless nights on patrol, checking my property like a paranoid security guard. Motion cameras, irregular schedules, even sleeping with windows open to catch unusual sounds. The October air carried every noise across the water. Owl calls, beaver tail slaps, the distant rumble of late-night truckers on Highway 93. She struck during the new moon, when darkness was absolute. The attack happened at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, captured by the wildlife camera I'd installed to monitor beaver activity. Never thought it would document a felony in progress. I woke Wednesday to environmental apocalypse. The stench hit first. Industrial accident mixed with rotting seafood thick enough to taste. Then the visual horror. Hundreds of rainbow trout floating belly up across Clearwater Lake's surface like silver coins scattered in a toxic fountain. My $180,000 breeding stock. 5 years of careful work. Gone. The emotional impact felt like taking shrapnel all over again. That moment when your brain struggles to process devastating loss. These fish weren't just inventory. They were my proof that a broken-down veteran could build something meaningful from nothing. Billy Redstone arrived within minutes, took one look at the carnage, and started photographing evidence. His camera shutter clicked like Morse code against the morning silence while dead fish lapped against the shoreline with each gentle wave. "This isn't natural die-off," he said grimly. "Someone murdered your lake." Wildlife Officer Rebecca Torres arrived 2 hours later with testing equipment that looked like something from CS Wine. The copper sulfate readings were off the charts, enough to kill fish in a lake 10 times Clearwater's size. "Massive chemical overdose," she confirmed. "Whoever did this used enough copper sulfate to sterilize a small reservoir." While Rebecca collected samples, I checked my wildlife camera expecting nothing, but found crystal clear footage of a figure in a kayak systematically poisoning my lake. The video was damning. Someone in dark clothing moving methodically across the water, dumping large bags of chemicals with practiced efficiency. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m., and the vehicle license plate was just visible enough for enhancement. But here's where Delilah's corporate background failed her. She'd used the HOA credit card for the chemical purchase, creating a paper trail that even a mall security guard could follow. The agricultural supply company had security footage of a 58-year-old woman buying 40 pounds of copper sulfate while claiming it was for emergency pond maintenance. "She's about as subtle as a brick through a window," Rebecca observed, reviewing the evidence. Rebecca's investigation revealed something I hadn't known. Clearwater Lake's underground springs continued through limestone caves, eventually surfacing as the aquifer that supplied Willowbrook Estate's private well system. Geological surveys showed the water journey took 6 to 8 weeks from my lake to their kitchen taps. Delilah had just poisoned her own drinking water. Emma Vasquez arrived by noon, drawn by emergency radio chatter. Her photographer captured the ecological disaster in devastating detail while I stood on my dock surveying the destruction of everything I'd built. "This crosses every line," Emma said, interviewing Rebecca. "Property disputes don't usually involve environmental terrorism." The story exploded statewide by evening. HOA president commits environmental terrorism dominated news cycles, complete with Delilah's corporate headshot next to images of my poisoned lake. Standing among the floating corpses of my life's work as sunset painted the contaminated water blood red, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about fishing rights anymore. This was about justice, and karma was about to flow downstream. Emma Vasquez called me Friday morning with excitement crackling in her voice like electricity before a lightning strike. "Ezra, I've been digging into Willowbrook Estate's water system for my follow-up story. You need to see what I found." She arrived 30 minutes later with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and Dr. Amanda Foster, a hydrogeologist from the University of Montana, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else than explaining water tables to journalists. "Show him the geological survey," Emma said, spreading county documents across my kitchen table. Dr. Foster pointed to a detailed cross-section that looked like something from a geology textbook. "This is fascinating, actually. Clearwater Lake sits in a unique limestone formation. See these underground channels?" The diagram showed my lake connected to an intricate cave system that snaked underground for miles before surfacing as natural springs. Little arrows traced water flow from Clearwater Lake through limestone caves, ending at a cluster of wells marked Willowbrook Estate's private water system. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "Are you saying—" "Your lake feeds their drinking water," Dr. Foster confirmed. "Every drop that flows through Willowbrook Estate started right here. The journey takes approximately 6 weeks through the cave system." The irony hit like a freight train loaded with cosmic justice. Emma's investigative smile could have powered the entire valley. Delilah poisoned her own water supply, and she has no idea. Dr. Foster pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. Copper sulfate doesn't break down easily in underground systems. It bonds with limestone, creating a slow-release contamination that could last months. Based on the amount used and flow rates, I'd estimate dangerous levels will reach their wells in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. 47 households would be drinking the same poison Delilah had used to murder my fish. The Environmental Protection Agency's safe drinking water limit for copper is 1.3 parts per million. My lake had tested at 47 parts per million immediately after the poisoning. What happens when people drink copper-contaminated water? I asked, though I suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea initially, Dr. Foster explained with clinical precision. Long-term exposure causes liver damage, kidney problems, neurological issues. Children and elderly are especially vulnerable. Emma was already taking notes, her pen scratching across paper like a woodpecker on speed. The best part? The original geological survey was filed with the county but never shared with Willowbrook residents. They have no idea where their water comes from. Here's something most people don't understand about private well systems. They're not monitored like municipal water supplies. No regular testing, no oversight, no early warning systems. Homeowners typically only discover contamination when people start getting sick. Dr. Foster showed me lab results from water samples she'd taken from Willowbrook's main distribution point. Currently clean, but watch this mathematical progression. Her calculations showed copper levels gradually climbing as contaminated water moved through the cave system. Week 1, undetectable. Week 3, approaching concern levels. Week 6, dangerous concentrations. Week 8, potentially toxic. I stared at the timeline, feeling like I was holding a countdown to poetic justice. Delilah had set a biological time bomb under her own community. There's more, Emma said, pulling out another document. I checked property records. Delilah and Marcus personally guaranteed the HOA's construction loans. Environmental cleanup costs would trigger personal liability clauses. They could lose everything. The scope of Delilah's self-destruction was breathtaking. She'd committed environmental terrorism, poisoned her own family's drinking water, and potentially bankrupted herself trying to eliminate my fishing operation. So, what do we do? Emma asked. Warn them immediately? I looked out at my poisoned lake, where dead fish still floated like accusations against the morning sky. These people had supported Delilah's harassment campaign, cheered her illegal blockades, celebrated the destruction of my livelihood. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. Kids lived in those houses. Elderly residents who'd done nothing wrong. Innocent people who'd trusted their HOA president to make reasonable decisions. We document everything first, I said finally. Build an airtight case. Then we give them the choice. Accountability or consequences. Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. Science and justice. I can work with that. The clock was ticking. 6 weeks until Delilah's poison reached her own kitchen tap. Time to plan the perfect reveal. The next 2 weeks felt like preparing for the most important mission of my life. Military training kicked in. Objective, timeline, resources, contingencies. Except this time, instead of neutralizing enemy positions, I was orchestrating the perfect public exposure of environmental terrorism. My workshop became mission control. Maps of the cave system covered every wall, water flow charts taped above my workbench, and a countdown calendar marking the days until copper contamination reached dangerous levels in Willowbrook's wells. The smell of sawdust and machine oil filled the air as I built what I was calling Operation Clearwater. The centerpiece was brilliantly simple. 2 identical 50-gallon aquarium tanks that would demonstrate the water connection in real time during the HOA's annual meeting. Tank 1 would contain clean spring water, with healthy trout swimming actively. Tank 2 would hold water from Willowbrook's current well supply, spiked with the same copper concentration that would soon flow from their kitchen taps. Dr. Foster helped me calculate the exact dosage. You want 15 parts per million, she explained, watching me mix the demonstration solution. High enough to kill fish quickly, low enough to be scientifically accurate for what they'll be drinking in 4 weeks. The visual impact would be undeniable. Live fish dying in real time while I explained that the toxic water came from their own wells. No technical jargon, no complex charts, just the stark reality of dead fish floating in water they'd been drinking for years. Emma coordinated the media strategy with the precision of a campaign manager. Local TV stations, environmental reporters, even a documentary filmmaker who'd been following rural gentrification issues. The annual HOA meeting was perfect timing. Mandatory attendance for all homeowners, plus we could invite outside observers under their own transparency bylaws. The key is layering the revelations, Emma explained over coffee that tasted like liquid alertness. Start with the crime, Build to the irony, climax with the personal consequences. By the time Delilah realizes what's happening, she'll be trapped in front of 200 witnesses. Billy Redstone rallied the veteran community with efficiency that would have impressed Pentagon logistics officers. Word spread through VFW posts, American Legion chapters, and informal networks of guys who understood what it meant when civilians attacked one of their own. They'd provide moral support and ensure Delilah couldn't claim this was just a personal vendetta. Here's something most people don't know about environmental law. When contamination crosses property lines, it triggers federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. Rebecca Torres had connected me with EPA Inspector Thomas Reed, who was building a case that could result in Superfund designation for the entire area. Property values would crater, insurance policies would cancel, and cleanup costs could reach millions. The EPA doesn't mess around with intentional contamination, Reed explained during a site visit that felt like a military briefing. We're talking criminal charges, civil penalties, and personal liability that could bankrupt everyone involved. The legal strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Delilah's crime had created a ticking time bomb that would devastate her own community. We could offer two choices: immediate confession and cooperation, or public exposure followed by federal prosecution. Either way, justice would be served. Janet Powell, the retired teacher who'd been questioning Delilah's leadership, became our inside ally. She'd been secretly organizing HOA members who were tired of Delilah's authoritarian management style. Margaret Wu provided financial documentation showing suspicious spending patterns and unauthorized purchases. Even Marcus, Delilah's own husband, was showing cracks under the pressure. He's been drinking heavily, Janet reported during one of our planning sessions, muttering about lawyers and moving to Mexico. I think guilt is eating him alive. The timeline was perfect. 4 weeks until dangerous contamination levels, 3 weeks until the annual meeting, 2 weeks until early symptoms might begin appearing in vulnerable residents. We'd reveal everything just as the consequences became undeniable. I spent evenings testing my presentation equipment, running through scenarios, preparing for every possible disruption. The portable water testing station borrowed from the university could analyze samples in real time, displaying results on a large screen that would make the science impossible to ignore. Dr. Foster coached me on explaining hydrogeology in terms that angry homeowners could understand. Think of it like a straw, she suggested. The lake is a poisoned drink, the caves are the straw, and their wells are their mouths. Simple, visual, terrifying. Yet the community center was reserved under the pretense of Delilah's important environmental announcement. She believed she was finally getting ahead of the media narrative, planning to blame my fish farm for contaminating their water supply. The irony was so perfect it felt like divine intervention. Rebecca Torres arranged for law enforcement presence during what she euphemistically called a public safety presentation. Emma confirmed media attendance under the guise of covering HOA environmental initiatives. Dr. Foster prepared scientific evidence that would withstand legal challenges. Everything was converging toward one moment: Delilah Thornfield standing before her community, about to learn that her crusade against my fishing operation had poisoned everyone she claimed to protect. The countdown had reached T-3 weeks. Time to spring the trap. 3 weeks before the annual meeting, Delilah's desperation reached levels that would have impressed a cornered badger with abandonment issues. The federal investigation had her spooked. EPA vehicles parked around town aren't exactly subtle, and Rebecca Torres's daily water sampling visits were attracting the kind of attention that makes guilty people sweat through expensive deodorant. Her first panic move came Tuesday night when my motion sensors lit up like a disco ball having an epileptic fit. I watched through security monitors as someone in dark clothing crept toward my workshop. The infrared cameras revealed the intruder's identity: Delilah Thornfield, former corporate executive, current suburban criminal, attempting burglary with all the grace of a drunk elephant in a china shop. She wanted the wildlife camera footage that had captured her midnight poisoning spree. The sound of her labored breathing carried through the audio feed, sharp, panicked gasps mixed with what sounded suspiciously like whimpering. Corporate compliance training apparently doesn't include a module on breaking and entering. My security system's floodlights triggered automatically, bathing her in illumination bright enough to guide aircraft to landing. Her face, captured in high-definition glory, displayed pure terror mixed with the kind of rage that makes people text their ex at 2 a.m. She ran faster than a taxpayer fleeing an IRS audit, abandoning a crowbar that would later yield perfect fingerprints for Rebecca's evidence file. Mini twist. What Delilah didn't know was that my security system automatically uploads footage to cloud storage. Breaking in would have been pointless even if she'd succeeded. The attempted burglary earned her an official visit from county deputies, but Delilah's real masterpiece of stupidity came the following week. Marcus had been unraveling like a cheap sweater in a washing machine. His drinking had progressed from social lubricant to requires intervention, and he'd started making guilt-ridden confessions to anyone within earshot. The man couldn't keep secrets if his life depended on it, which ironically it now did. That's when Delilah decided to solve her federal problem through the ancient art of bribery. Rebecca Torres called me Thursday morning, her voice mixing professional outrage with genuine amazement at human stupidity. "You won't believe what just happened. Delilah tried to buy me off." The details were almost too ridiculous for reality. Delilah had approached Rebecca at Mountain Grounds Coffee, sliding an envelope across the table like she was conducting international espionage instead of attempting to corrupt a federal employee in full view of security cameras. $25,000 cash, Rebecca explained with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won the evidence lottery, plus promises of future consulting opportunities if I'd blame your fish farm for the contamination. The coffee shop's security system captured everything in glorious detail. Delilah's nervous glances, the envelope exchange, Rebecca's poker face while she documented a federal crime in real time. The audio was even better. Delilah actually used phrases like mutually beneficial arrangement and unfortunate misunderstanding, apparently believing she was starring in a mob movie instead of digging her own legal grave. Here's something most people don't realize. Bribing federal officers carries a minimum 5-year sentence, and prosecutors treat recorded attempts like Christmas morning. Rebecca's body camera had captured every word, every gesture, every beat of nervous sweat. FBI agent Patricia Hawkins arrived from Missoula within hours, treating Delilah's bribery attempt like an early birthday present. Federal white-collar prosecutors dream about cases this straightforward: recorded evidence, multiple witnesses, and a defendant stupid enough to commit crimes on camera. The community was fracturing under pressure like a dam made of crackers. Margaret Wu discovered Delilah had embezzled $47,000 in HOA funds to pay for legal representation. Janet Powell's resistance movement was growing stronger, demanding emergency meetings to remove their criminal president. Even loyal supporters were distancing themselves faster than people evacuating a gas leak. Marcus's psychological breakdown accelerated like a runaway freight train. He'd started day drinking at the community pool, cornering neighbors with rambling confessions about environmental lawyers and federal prison food. The metallic smell of fear mixed with chlorine and desperation created an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife. Dr. Foster's water testing showed copper levels climbing steadily through the cave system. 15 days until dangerous concentrations, 10 days until the annual meeting, 5 days until sensitive residents might start experiencing symptoms. The timeline was tightening like a noose around Delilah's neck. Her final act of desperation came Sunday evening, attempting to withdraw the family's entire savings account. Bank security protocols triggered when she tried to access $89,000 cash for immediate travel expenses. Federal bail restrictions prevented her from leaving the county, but desperation doesn't always inspire rational decision-making. Standing in my workshop, surrounded by countdown calendars and evidence files, I felt the satisfaction of watching justice approach with mathematical precision. 9 days until the annual meeting. 9 days until Delilah faced the consequences of poisoning her own drinking water. The trap was set. The evidence was overwhelming. Time for the final act. 8 days before the annual meeting, Delilah made one final attempt to control the narrative, and it backfired so spectacularly that even her own lawyer probably considered changing careers. With federal charges looming and her community turning against her, she hired Dr. Gerald Stackhouse, an environmental consultant whose resume read like a greatest hits collection of corporate cover-ups. His specialty was appearing at hearings to claim that obvious pollution was actually natural geological variance, usually for oil companies fighting EPA fines. Dr. Stackhouse cost $500 per hour and looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who testifies that mercury is probably good for children. Slicked back hair, expensive suit that couldn't hide his oily personality, and the kind of smile that made honest people check their wallets. His plan was simple: claim the copper contamination occurred naturally from mineral deposits, argue that my fish farm had always been environmentally dangerous, and suggest that Delilah was a concerned citizen protecting her community from a reckless veteran's poor judgment. The strategy might have worked if Marcus hadn't chosen that exact moment to suffer a complete psychological collapse. Tuesday afternoon, while Dr. Stackhouse was setting up his laptop for a practice presentation at the community center, Marcus stumbled in drunk enough to float a battleship. The smell of bourbon mixed with desperation filled the room like a toxic cloud as he interrupted the rehearsal with a confession that would have impressed a Catholic priest. "Stop lying for her," Marcus shouted, swaying like a tree in a hurricane. "She poisoned the lake. I drove the getaway car. We dumped 40 pounds of copper sulfate at 2 a.m. because she hates fishing." The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as awkward concentrate. Dr. Stackhouse's laptop screen still displayed his opening slide. Natural copper occurrence in Montana limestone formations. The irony was so thick you could have spread it on toast. Mini twist. What nobody knew was that Janet Powell had been secretly recording HOA meetings for months, documenting Delilah's authoritarian behavior. Her phone captured Marcus's entire confession in crystal-clear audio. Margaret Wu, who'd been taking meeting notes, dropped her pen like it was radioactive. 3 other HOA board members exchanged looks that communicated entire conversations about liability, criminal complicity, and whether their homeowner's insurance covered accessory after the fact. Dr. Stackhouse tried to salvage the situation with corporate damage control techniques that work better in boardrooms than community centers. "Obviously, Mr. Thornfield is experiencing significant stress." "Stress?" Marcus laughed with the bitter edge of someone who'd discovered that crime doesn't actually pay. "I'm experiencing federal charges, Gerald. We poisoned our own drinking water to stop people from fishing. How's that for stress?" Delilah arrived 20 minutes later to find her carefully orchestrated defense presentation in ruins, and her husband providing free confessions to anyone within earshot. Her face went through more expressions than a mime having a seizure: surprise, rage, panic, and finally the hollow look of someone realizing their elaborate schemes had crumbled like a house of cards in a tornado. "Marcus, shut up," she hissed, but the damage was already spreading like spilled coffee on important documents. Janet Powell's recording was uploaded to social media within hours. The audio of Marcus confessing to environmental terrorism, while Delilah's expensive expert sat helplessly in the background, became the most shared content in Bitterroot Valley history. Local news stations played it hourly. Environmental groups shared it nationally. Even late-night comedy shows picked up the story of the HOA president who poisoned herself while trying to eliminate fishing. The community's remaining support for Delilah evaporated faster than water in the Sahara. Residents who'd defended her authoritarian management style suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere when she appeared in public. The Willowbrook Estates Facebook group became a digital lynch mob demanding her immediate resignation. Dr. Stackhouse withdrew from the case faster than a vampire fleeing sunrise, citing irreconcilable differences with client objectives. And his parting advice was reportedly, plead guilty and hope for federal prison with a good library. Meanwhile, Dr. Foster's water testing showed copper concentrations approaching dangerous levels in the cave system. We were 6 days from the annual meeting, 4 days from potential health impacts, and watching Delilah's world collapse in real time like a controlled demolition. The smell of panic was literally hanging over Willowbrook Estates. You could taste the desperation in the air, metallic and sharp, mixed with the acrid scent of burning bridges and ruined reputations. Rebecca Torres received calls from 3 different news outlets requesting interviews about environmental terrorism. The FBI added conspiracy charges based on Marcus's recorded confession. The county attorney filed additional charges for attempted bribery and destruction of evidence. Standing on my dock, watching the sun set over water that was finally beginning to clear as the copper settled into sediment, I felt the satisfaction of watching justice approach with the inevitability of gravity. 5 days until the annual meeting. 5 days until Delilah learned that poisoning your own well is the ultimate example of playing stupid games and winning stupid prizes. The end game was here. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. 200 people packed into a space designed for 50, with news cameras creating a forest of tripods and reporters treating this like the environmental crime story of the decade. I arrived early with my dual aquarium setup, watching Dr. Foster calibrate testing equipment that looked like something from a space mission. The morning air carried the metallic scent of nervous sweat mixed with the ozone smell of too much electronic equipment running in one room. Tank 1 contained crystal-clear spring water with 6 healthy rainbow trout swimming actively. Tank 2 held water from Willowbrook's wells, dosed with the exact copper concentration they'd be drinking in 72 hours. The visual setup was impossible to ignore. Life versus death, separated by identical glass containers. Delilah entered at exactly 10 a.m., flanked by a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be defending serial killers than environmental terrorists. Her power suit couldn't hide the hollow-eyed desperation of someone who'd spent the last week watching her world collapse in real time. Marcus wasn't with her. He was in federal custody after violating bail conditions by attempting to flee to Canada. The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile. Residents who'd trusted her leadership for 3 years now faced potential health crises, plummeting property values, and federal cleanup costs that could bankrupt the entire community. The sound of 200 angry people whispering created a buzz like a disturbed hornet's nest. Emma Vasquez had positioned cameras for maximum impact. Local TV, regional news outlets, even environmental documentarians who'd driven from Seattle to capture what prosecutors were calling Montana's worst case of intentional water contamination. I stepped to the microphone as silence fell like a heavy curtain. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ezra Blackwood. 3 weeks ago, someone poisoned my lake with 40 pounds of copper sulfate, killing $180,000 worth of fish overnight. The crowd's attention focused like a laser beam. Dr. Foster activated the large display screen, showing geological cross-sections of the underground cave system connecting Clearwater Lake to Willowbrook's wells. Here's what the person responsible didn't know, I continued, watching Delilah's face drain of color as understanding dawned. Your drinking water comes from the same lake she poisoned. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Gasps, shouts, parents grabbing children like the water was already toxic. Someone screamed, "Oh my God, we've been drinking poison," while others pulled out phones to call doctors, lawyers, anyone who might have answers. Dr. Foster's presentation was devastating in its simplicity. Water flow patterns, contamination timelines, and copper concentration graphs that showed dangerous levels approaching their wells within days, not weeks. The person who poisoned Mr. Blackwood's fish, Dr. Foster explained with scientific precision, essentially poisoned your entire water supply. Peak toxicity will occur in approximately 72 hours. That's when I revealed the real-time demonstration. This is your water supply, I said, pointing to Tank 2. Same copper concentration you'll be drinking by Thursday. I added 6 healthy trout to the contaminated tank. The fish began showing distress immediately. Erratic swimming, gasping at the surface, the unmistakable signs of copper poisoning. Within minutes, the first fish went belly up, floating like a silver accusation in toxic water. The visual impact was undeniable. Live fish dying in water identical to what flowed from their kitchen taps. No technical explanations needed, no complex charts required, just the stark reality of poisoned water killing living creatures in real time. The crowd's fury turned laser-focused on Delilah. 200 people who'd trusted her judgment now understood she'd committed environmental terrorism against her own community. "How could you do this to us?" shouted Janet Powell, her teacher's voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You poisoned our children!" FBI agent Patricia Hawkins stepped forward as Delilah tried to leave. "Delilah Thornfield, you're under arrest for environmental terrorism, conspiracy, bribery of federal officers, and reckless endangerment of public health." The handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the stunned silence like the closing of a book. Cameras captured every moment as federal agents escorted the woman who'd destroyed her own community's water supply while trying to eliminate a disabled veteran's fishing operation. But the moment that sealed her fate came when I offered her a glass of water from Tank 2. "Mrs. Thornfield," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room, "since you think this water is safe enough for your neighbor's children, would you like to take a drink?" The glass sat on the table between us, copper-contaminated water that matched exactly what would flow from her kitchen tap in 3 days. Every eye in the room focused on her face as she stared at the toxic water she'd created through her own hatred and stupidity. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stand there while 200 witnesses and a dozen cameras captured the moment she realized the full scope of her self-destruction. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. The mic drop moment was complete. justice served with scientific precision and community witness. 18 months later, Clearwater Lake sparkled like liquid diamonds under the Montana sun, cleaner than it had been before Delilah's attack. Sometimes destruction clears the way for something better. The immediate aftermath had been chaos, but the kind of productive chaos that builds stronger communities. FEMA emergency water trucks arrived within hours, turning Willowbrook Estates into a temporary disaster relief zone. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before found themselves organizing distribution schedules, sharing resources, and discovering that surviving crisis together creates bonds that outlast property disputes. Delilah received 7 years federal prison plus $2, $8 million in restitution. Marcus got 3 years probation for cooperation, though he spent most of that time in alcohol, rehabilitation, and therapy. Their assets were liquidated faster than ice cream at a summer picnic. The Scottsdale vacation home, investment portfolios, even Delilah's precious BMW went to pay cleanup costs and victim compensation. The environmental restoration became a model for EPA Superfund success stories. Advanced filtration systems not only removed copper contamination, but improved overall water quality beyond original standards. Dr. Foster's university research team used the cave system as a natural laboratory, developing water purification techniques that are now used nationwide. But the real transformation was community-driven. The residents dissolved their authoritarian HOA and created something unprecedented, the Willowbrook Environmental Cooperative. Instead of covenant enforcement, they focused on conservation. Instead of property value obsession, they prioritized sustainability. Janet Powell became their first president, running unopposed on a platform of transparency, environmental protection, and community cooperation. My fish farm not only recovered, but thrived beyond my wildest projections. The Federal Victim Compensation Fund, combined with an unexpected insurance settlement, allowed me to expand operations and create something I'd never imagined, the Clearwater Conservation Foundation. The foundation operates an environmental education center that brings school groups, college students, and researchers to study sustainable aquaculture. We host fishing clinics for disabled veterans, teaching skills that translate into therapy, income, and community. The smell of fresh mountain air mixed with productive purpose fills the property every day. Our crowning achievement is the annual Clearwater Festival, celebrating environmental restoration through community action. Last year's festival drew 3,000 visitors, raising $85,000 for our Veterans Scholarship Program. Kids who'd never seen sustainable farming learn about ecosystem management, while their parents discover that environmental protection and economic prosperity aren't opposing forces. The Scholarship Fund has helped 12 veterans start their own aquaculture operations across the Rocky Mountain region. Billy Redstone expanded his guide service into environmental education tours. Even Tom and Sarah Tatum converted part of their ranch into a demonstration site for regenerative agriculture practices. Property values in Willowbrook recovered completely within 2 years, driven by the area's reputation for environmental leadership and community cooperation. Turns out that positive media attention about successful environmental restoration attracts buyers more than HOA enforcement of mailbox heights. Dr. Foster established a permanent research station at Clearwater Lake, studying how communities can recover from intentional environmental damage. Her published papers are required reading in environmental law programs nationwide, and she regularly testifies before Congress about community-based restoration strategies. Emma Vasquez won a regional journalism award for her environmental crime coverage and now writes a syndicated column about rural community issues. Her follow-up documentary, Poisoned Wells: How One Woman Destroyed Her Own Community, airs regularly on environmental networks and serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked authority. Rebecca Torres was promoted to Regional Wildlife Supervisor, with expanded authority to investigate environmental crimes across 3 states. She credits the Willowbrook case with transforming how federal agencies coordinate with local communities during environmental emergencies. Standing on my dock this morning, watching visitors learn about sustainable fishing while their children explore the education center, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Afghanistan: complete peace with my purpose. The sound of kids laughing mixed with trout jumping created a soundtrack that military disability had never allowed me to imagine. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you creates the best thing you never knew was possible. The taste of clean mountain air reminds me daily that justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like healing, growth, and communities choosing cooperation over conflict.
Asa spent 5 years building something meaningful on his own land, and Delilah thought she could just eliminate all of that with a midnight boat ride and 40 pounds of copper sulfate. The thing about people like Delilah is this: they are so focused on what they can't stand seeing. They never bother to understand how things actually work. She knew that lake was ruining her view. What she didn't know was where her morning coffee water came from. She had all the authority, all the HOA bylaws, all the expensive lawyers, but Era had something she didn't. He understood his properties. He knew the geology. He took the time to learn how the underground spring system actually functioned. 6 weeks, that's how long it took for her own poison to reach her kitchen tap. 6 weeks of thinking she won, while the consequences were literally flowing toward her house underground. I see a lot of the HOA stories, and there's always this moment where the person with all the office of power realized they had been operating on assumptions that were quite right. Sometimes it's covenant language. Sometimes it's state law they never check. This time, basic geologies. Have you ever dealt with an HOA president who was so focused on winning, they stopped paying attention to realities? Let me know what happened. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Because unfortunately, Delilah not the only board member who made decisions without understanding the consequences.